Ladies and gentlemen, we welcome you to the House of Presidents. The wax figures of the presidents you're about to see are authentic in every detail. The devotion of much time, effort, thought, and money has created this museum and the life-size figures of each United States president. In the next 30 minutes, history will unfold before your eyes as you visit with our presidents. We ask that you do not delay moving from room to room in the House of Presidents. You will have approximately 1 minute to go to the next room. Please do not touch any of the presidents. We would appreciate your comments at the end of the program by writing them in our guest book. Please enjoy the show. This is your narrator and host for this rare moment in history. We begin by returning to 1789. The father of our nation was George Washington, this country's first and foremost military leader. Washington was born on a Fredericksburg, Virginia farm in February 22, 1732. During the French and Indian War, he was given the dangerous mission of warning the French from inciting the Indians, or war would result. With this objective in mind, he also used his training as a surveyor to select sites for forts in case of war. Returning to Mount Vernon, he married Martha Dandridge Custis. As commander-in-chief during the American Revolution, his sheer determination won the war. His death in 1799 shocked the nation. Washington was truly first in war, first in peace, and first in the hearts of his countrymen. John Adams, second president of the United States, lived to see what no other president has seen: a son in the White House. The eldest of 8 Massachusetts boys of farm stock, he became a teacher, a lawyer, and the first vice president under Washington. He helped draft the Declaration of Independence and was one of the original signers. He joined Ben Franklin and John Jay to negotiate the peace treaty with England in 1783. Jefferson called Adams the Atlas of Independence. Adams died on the 4th of July, 1826, at the age of 90. Thomas Jefferson, the third of 10 children born in a Shadwell, Virginia farmhouse, was taller than Washington and had sandy, reddish hair, freckles, and a jutting chin. It was his ability, not his looks, that made him a great man. A lawyer, graduated from the College of William and Mary, Jefferson penned the Declaration of Independence and the Religious Freedom Statute of Virginia to give graphic proof of his hatred of tyranny. After a bitter struggle and a tie vote with Aaron Burr, the House of Representatives elected Jefferson president. He was a violinist, architect, inventor, writer, and linguist. He knew Greek, Latin, French, Spanish, and German. It was Jefferson who acquired the Louisiana Purchase from France at a $15 million cost, but it doubled the size of the United States. Jefferson died July 4th, 1826, the same day as John Adams. As the nation mourned these two great men, they also celebrated the 50th birthday of Jefferson's greatest contribution to mankind, his Declaration of Independence. The smallest man ever to become president, 5 feet 4 inches tall, frail, and soft-spoken, was James Madison, the son of a well-to-do Virginian farmer. He possessed the ability to accomplish 10 times that expected, was a giant among the founders of the government. He labored hard and long to see the Constitution perfected and adopted, earning him the title Father of the Constitution. He served as Jefferson's Secretary of State before succeeding him as Chief Executive. Madison, during the War of 1812 and the England blockade of Europe, stated the British had no right to interfere with American merchant vessels. He fled Washington when British forces attacked and partially burned the capital. His wife, the famed Dolly Madison, saved the Declaration of Independence and other valuables from the flame. Madison died land poor at the age of 85 after serving his country for 40 years. This president of the United States is James Monroe. He soldiered with Washington and studied under Jefferson. Although awkward and shy, he was a capable public servant as Secretary of State under Madison and later as Secretary of War. His administration was called the Era of Good Feeling. During the calm years of his first term, the United States bought Florida from Spain. And during his second term, he penned the Monroe Doctrine. His Secretary of State, John Quincy Adams, drafted the doctrine, warning all nations not to extend their colonies in the Western Hemisphere. This document remains a cornerstone of American policy even today. Monroe, ironically, died July 4th, 1831, the third U.S. president to die on that holiday. He, too, was poor at the time of his death. The son of a former president, John Adams, John Quincy Adams, entered politics at the age of 14 and was the youngest public servant in the history of the United States. He was secretary to our Russian envoy. His life matched every great event in the nation's history as he viewed every battle from Bunker Hill to the close of the Mexican War. Adams stood for good government rather than party prominence. This, coupled with a strong stand against slavery, caused his defeat for re-election. He later became a member of Congress and for 16 years was the foremost opponent to slavery and the most impressive figure in the nation. After 55 years of service to his country, he suffered a stroke in the Hall of Congress and died in February 1848 at the age of 80. This is Old Hickory, General Andrew Jackson, 7th President of the United States. Born of frontier stock on the border of South and North Carolina, he was a soldier at the age of 14 and an orphan at 15. He was captured during the American Revolution and was scarred by life by the sword of a British officer. He became a lawyer at the age of 20 and was the first representative from the state of Tennessee when it entered the Union in 1796. He defeated the British at Mobile and at New Orleans in 1815. His policy was, to the victor belongs the spoils. He ran the government his own way and fired 2,000 federal workers, giving their jobs to friends and supporters. While president, he had 4 secretaries of state, 5 secretaries of the Treasury, 3 of War and Navy, and 2 postmaster generals. Despite his faults, he was a symbol of towering strength, courage, and devotion. Rough-hewn Andy Jackson died June 8, 1845, at the age of 78. Ladies and gentlemen, we continue our historical look at our presidents with the 8th man to hold the high office, Martin Van Buren, the son of a tavern owner. Van Buren never went to college, but by studying law with a noted New York attorney, he gained his law degree in 1803 when he was 21 years old. Van Buren entered politics early and rose from a convention delegate to county surrogate, state senator, and attorney general, and finally United States senator. He resigned this high post to become governor of New York State, and later he was elected vice president. He became president in 1837, and his administration saw the Seminole War, revolution in Ontario and Texas, and the financial panic of 1837. Van Buren put the gold reserves into an independent treasury and separated the state banks from the government. Defeated in a bid for re-election, he retired to his hometown where he died in 1862 at the age of 79. William Henry Harrison, the son of a wealthy Virginia farmer, quit the study of medicine to become a soldier. For 50 years, Harrison served as a colorful Indian fighter. He campaigned with Mad Anthony Wayne to win the Ohio Valley for white settlement, and at the age of 27 became the governor of the entire Northwest Territory. In 1811, he led his troops against the Indians in the famed Battle of Tippecanoe. As a major general in the War of 1812, he beat the Indians and the English at the Battle of the Thames, and Admiral Perry, under his direction, with the Navy, won victory in the Battle of Lake Erie. In 1840, the Whigs staged the most colorful and exciting campaign in history, complete with torchlight parades and lively songs and slogans. One slogan, Tippecanoe and Tyler too, was for he and his running mate John Tyler. At the age of 68, he was the oldest man ever elected president, and by a landslide too. On a bitter, cold day, he gave the longest inaugural speech on record, caught cold, developed pneumonia, and died in the White House within a month in 1841. John Tyler was 51 years old when he reached the White House upon the death of Harrison, but despite his age, he'd served as a member of the Virginia legislature and in the House and Senate of the United States. His father was governor of Virginia. Tyler was a tall, thin man with a high-bridged nose who was called Honest John. During his administration, the telegraph was developed, and he sent the first message between Washington and Baltimore. Tyler vetoed a Whig banking bill, and his entire cabinet, except Daniel Webster, resigned. He then negotiated a near-secret deal to bring Texas into the Union. He signed the hotly contested bill on his last day in office, and Texas became the 20th state in the United States. For the next 18 years, until his death in 1862, Tyler was a strong advocate of and fighter for states' rights. Our next president was James Knox Polk, a man who extended the United States to the Pacific Ocean. Polk was from North Carolina, college-educated, with the polish of a gentleman. Despite the fact that he was not a military man, he solved two land problems with force and the threat of force. Polk ordered General Zachary Taylor to occupy disputed territory along the Rio Grande to solve the Texas border dispute. And when peace came 2 years later, Mexico surrendered land that later became Utah, Nevada, and California. Then, Polk threatened war against England to settle the northern boundary dispute. Peaceful settlement gave the United States land now known as Oregon and Washington. 3 months after leaving the White House for retirement to Tennessee, Polk died from illness and overwork at the age of 53. This man never cast a vote, participated in a campaign, or held public office before he became president in 1849. General Zachary Taylor was a career soldier rising from lieutenant in the War of 1812 to colonel in the Black Hawk War, brigadier general in the Seminole War, and later as commander of the Southwest. And at Buena Vista, he and 5,000 volunteers defeated General Santa Anna and 20,000 Mexican soldiers. His nickname was Old Rough and Ready. The general refused to open the Whig invitation to become president and mailed it back with 10 cents postage due. But the Whigs put on a spirited campaign, and Taylor became the 12th president, with slavery his biggest problem. And during the first months of his office, Congress passed the Compromise of 1850, an act that abolished slave trade, but did provide for the return of runaway slaves to their masters. This caused the creation of the Underground Railroad. 5 days after laying the cornerstone of the Washington Monument, and after only 16 months in office, Taylor died in the White House. Vice President Millard Fillmore assumed the vacancy when Taylor died. He served 2 years and 8 months and was defeated for re-election. Fillmore was born in a New York State log cabin. His father was a woodcarver. Later, Fillmore went to Buffalo and studied law. This led to politics and to the New York State legislature and finally to Congress. Fillmore sent Commodore Perry to Japan to open up trade with that nation, but when he signed the Compromise of 1850, both pro- and anti-slavery groups came out against him. Defeated in his try for re-election, he retired to a quiet life in Buffalo until his death in 1874 at the age of 74. Our next president was Franklin Pierce, called the Dark Horse from New Hampshire. Pierce was a handsome man and a fluent orator who rose fast in politics. He was a U.S. senator from his state, but resigned because his beautiful wife did not like social life. He defeated General Winfield Scott, the Whig presidential candidate, by a lopsided electoral vote, and won the presidency without making one campaign speech. Pierce shifted from one side of the slavery issue to the other, probably bringing the threat of civil war closer. He retired after his term to Concord, New Hampshire, where he died at the age of 65. The men in this room guided the nation through crisis and great change. We began with James Buchanan. Born in a log cabin in Pennsylvania, he graduated in the first class at Dickinson College. Old Buck, as he was later called, was in politics from age 23 to age 70. Buchanan was the only president who never married. He failed to handle the problem of slavery, and he watched the southern states break away from the Union. When he completed his term, he was happy to turn over this problem to his successor. Buchanan died at the age of 77 after watching this nation's bloodiest and greatest internal conflict. The tallest president, 6 feet, 4 inches, is called by many historians the greatest president. Abraham Lincoln was born in Kentucky in 1809. A strong president, Lincoln faced the greatest crisis between the days of Valley Forge and Pearl Harbor. The Cotton States had seceded. Determined to maintain the Union, Lincoln proved himself the most effective leader any nation had in time of war. He tried general after general until Grant and Sherman led the North to victory. And as the tide of victory turned to the Union, he held out the prospect of a just and honorable peace. His moral qualities knitted the people together, fortified their resolutions, and raised them to a spiritual sense of self-sacrifice. At Gettysburg, and at his second inaugural, he expressed his true greatness of soul with words and ideas that live on in history. 5 days after the surrender of General Lee, Lincoln was the first president assassinated when actor John Wilkes Booth fired a bullet into his brain. When he died the next morning, Secretary of War Edwin Stanton said, "Now he belongs to the ages." The death of Lincoln thrust Andrew Johnson into the presidency with responsibilities that spelled his political disaster. Johnson was born in North Carolina, but he later moved to Tennessee, where he was elected to Congress. When other state senators and representatives were leaving Washington to secede from the Union, Johnson stayed on, enraging the South. Lincoln rewarded this loyalty by making him military governor of Tennessee. 2 years later, he was Lincoln's running mate. A group of Reconstructionists tried to impeach Johnson, but failed by 1 vote in the Senate. He was not renominated for the presidency, but he later returned to the Senate in 1875, but died in the same year. This is Ulysses S. Grant, called the hero of Appomattox. Grant was a West Point graduate. He served in nearly every major battle of the Mexican War before resigning to return to his native Ohio. At the beginning of the Civil War, Grant returned to the service as a regimental commander. And by sheer courage and the wise military tactics, he became the most celebrated general in America. At Appomattox, when General Lee surrendered the South and 27,000 men, Grant let the prisoners return home with their swords, horses, and mules, an act that won admiration in both the North and the South. A 2-term president, his second term in office was marred by the Wall Street Panic of 1876. This panic put 23,000 small businessmen out of work. In 1884, after leaving the presidency and joining a New York investment firm, he was financially wiped out in another Wall Street collapse. Living on borrowed sums, Grant labored on his 2-volume memoirs and completed them in July of 1885, just 3 days before his death. This is Rutherford B. Hayes of Delaware, Ohio, 19th President of the United States. Educated at Kenyon College and at Harvard Law School, Hayes opposed slavery and served as a Union commander during the war. While serving as a major general, he was elected to Congress. Later, he returned to Ohio to serve 3 terms as governor. In the election of 1876, Hayes felt he had lost, but when the electoral votes were counted, it was Hayes who was the president. Pushed into the White House, Hayes tried to be fair and honest in his appointments, naming his own cabinet. He launched civil service reforms, recalled the last federal troops from the South. Republicans called him a renegade, and he was opposed to a second term as president on principle. Hayes died in Fremont, Ohio, in 1893. Our next president, James A. Garfield, was also from Ohio. Garfield was born in a log cabin near Cleveland of sturdy American parents. He studied at Williams College and returned to teach language at Hiram College, Ohio. He later became president of that college, and while still teaching, he received his law degree. Garfield served as a major general in the war between the states, and while still in the military service, he was nominated for Congress. Serving 8 terms in the House, he was elected to the Senate, but never took his seat, since his party nominated him for president. A disgruntled office seeker, Charles Guiteau, shot Garfield on July 2nd, 1881, and the president lingered for nearly 2 months until he died on September 19th, 1881. Upon the death of Garfield, Chester A. Arthur assumed the reins of government. Arthur was from Vermont, studied law, was an energetic Republican worker, was appointed by President Grant as collector of customs at the port of New York. With this job, he controlled the patronage of about 300 jobs. During his term in office, 3 transcontinental railroads were completed as the nation was in the middle of a giant industrial and commercial expansion. The plans for a canal across the Isthmus of Panama were under study. Arthur returned to New York City upon his retirement and died within 1 year in November of 1886. Arthur was known as one of the most stylishly dressed presidents in history. As the nation approached the turn of the century, Grover Cleveland was in the White House. Cleveland was born in New Jersey, but he gained his political recognition as a prosecutor, sheriff, and finally mayor of Buffalo, New York. From this post, he became governor of the state, but before his first term was completed, he was nominated and elected president. His 2 terms in office were not consecutive, but were split when Benjamin Harrison defeated Cleveland by electoral votes, despite the fact that Cleveland had a popular majority of the votes cast. Cleveland faced the labor strife of the late 1800s, monetary standards, and immigration problems. In his 2nd term, he persuaded Great Britain to arbitrate the Venezuela boundary, and he kept peace with Spain over Cuban independence. After his 2nd term, Cleveland returned to Princeton, New Jersey, where he died in 1908. The man who served between the 2 terms of Cleveland was Benjamin Harrison, a general officer in the Union Army who served under Sherman. Another Ohioan by birthright, Harrison was mainly active in Indiana politics. His campaign against Cleveland was backed by big business, with the largest campaign fund on record. It was during his term in the White House that Congress passed the Silver Purchase Law, the McKinley High Tariff Bill, and the Sherman Antitrust Law. When Cleveland defeated Harrison, the former president returned to Indiana, where he lived until his death in 1901. In the center of Niles, Ohio, a giant oval monument pays tribute to William McKinley, 25th President of the United States. When Civil War ended, McKinley was a major, and he was only 22 years old. He returned to his home, studied law, then went to Congress for 12 years. McKinley then returned to his native state for a term as governor. It was during McKinley's tenure in office that he preserved the gold standard, raised the tariff, and pursued an open-door policy with China. The sinking of the battleship Maine in Havana Harbor put America at war with Spain and sent Teddy Roosevelt and his Rough Riders into action. McKinley was elected to a 2nd term, but while welcoming guests at the Pan American Exposition in Buffalo, New York, he was assassinated by anarchist Leon Zogos. The product of a great family and born on New York City's Lower East Side, Theodore Roosevelt was a puny child, but by constant physical training, he developed into a rugged man. A civil service commissioner and police commissioner for New York City, he gained attention and finally was appointed Secretary of the Navy. He gained national prominence as the commander of the famed Rough Riders. As governor of New York State, he opposed unfair business practices, and as vice president under McKinley, he assumed the presidency when McKinley died from an assassin's bullets. When he entered the White House, he was 42 years old. As president, he arbitrated the Alaskan boundary dispute, settled the anthracite coal strike, and won the Nobel Peace Prize for settling the war between Russia and Japan. He also played a major role in the construction of the Panama Canal. After 2 terms, he toured the world, returned to his home on Long Island, where he died in 1919. This man's family continues in politics to this day. William Howard Taft from Cincinnati, Ohio, was our 27th president, a judge of the Ohio Superior Court, and later as governor of the Philippines. When he assumed the presidency in 1908, Taft was 6 feet 2 inches tall and weighed 332 pounds, to be the largest president in our history. When leaving office 4 years later, he had gained 22 pounds. He created the Postal Savings Bank and Parcel Post, was an able chief executive, so able that when he left office, his successor appointed him Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court. No other man in history has ever been both President and Chief Justice. Our next president, the founder of the League of Nations, was a schoolmaster until he was 50. He then became a maker of history. Woodrow Wilson was born in Stanton, Virginia, and was a lawyer and a doctor of philosophy. He taught at Johns Hopkins University, among a number of schools, before becoming president of Princeton University. In 1910, he became governor of New Jersey on a reform platform that gained national recognition. In 1912, he was elected president. Wilson formed the Federal Trade Commission and the Federal Reserve System. He supported the Farm Loan Act, the Child Labor Act, and the Pure Food Act. Wilson kept us out of war until German subs declared unrestricted submarine war. Wilson drafted his famous 14 points after the German surrender, and he was the author of the League of Nations and won the Nobel Peace Prize. The United States Senate rejected by 7 votes his plan to join the League. Wilson left the White House in failing health, and for 4 years before his death extended every effort to get the United States to join the League. Our next president was a dark horse from Ohio, Warren G. Harding, the son of a doctor. Harding became a newspaper publisher before entering politics. He served as a senator before he was nominated and elected our 29th president. He faced Reconstruction following World War I, and although he was against our joining the League of Nations, he did want the U.S. to join the World Court. 3 members of his cabinet broke his trust and touched off the famous Teapot Dome scandals. Harding was distressed by the betrayal of his trust and went on a speaking tour that took him to Alaska. Upon his return, he suddenly fell ill and died in a San Francisco hotel on August 2nd, 1923. Ladies and gentlemen, the men in this room are our modern-day presidents. The first Silent Cal, as he was known, was the only president ever born on the 4th of July. Calvin Coolidge was from Vermont. His parents were thrifty New England farmers. A lawyer and politician, he held numerous state offices, including 2 terms as governor of Massachusetts, where his settlement of the Boston police strike gained national attention. He was Harding's vice president, and within hours of learning of the president's death, Coolidge took the oath of office from his father, a Plymouth, Vermont justice of the peace. He cleaned up the Teapot Dome scandal, reduced the public debt by $2 billion, and in 1928 informed the nation, "I do not choose to run." He retired to Northampton, Massachusetts, where he wrote for a newspaper syndicate until his death 5 years later. The son of a Quaker blacksmith was our next president. Herbert Hoover was the first multimillionaire to assume the presidency. He was National Food Administrator under Wilson and Secretary of Commerce under Presidents Harding and Coolidge. Hoover was liked by both parties, and in 1928, Republicans secured his nomination, and he was elected. Within 1 year, the nation suffered its worst stock market crash in history, and Hoover immediately set up boards and commissions to handle the emergency. He proposed a moratorium on war debts between nations. Hoover was defeated in a bid for another term as the nation looked to the party not in power to restore the nation's economy. In his defeat, he received fewer electoral votes than any man in history.
Herbert Hoover died in New York on October 20th, 1964.
This is the famous figure of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Born in Hyde Park, New York, he assumed the presidency at the peak of the Depression. He was a Harvard graduate and a Columbia University lawyer. A state senator and Secretary of the Navy during World War I, he later became a vice presidential candidate. He was stricken with polio in 1921, and by 1924, he was able to walk with a cane and braces, and he nominated Al Smith at the convention that year. As governor of New York, he gained the prominence he needed to win the 1932 nomination and the presidency. He was the only president to serve an unprecedented 4 terms. Just before the end of World War II, with victory in sight, he was stricken and died at the Little White House at Warm Springs, Georgia, near the site of his famous polio clinic. The man who assumed the presidency upon the death of FDR is known as Mr. Citizen. Harry S. Truman was the son of a horse and mule trader from Lamer, Missouri. His first 38 years of life were unimpressive. But from 1922 until today, his life has been active and rewarding. He served as a county judge before he became a U.S. Senator in 1934. It was Truman who authorized the dropping of the atom bomb during the final days of World War II. The post-war years were full of domestic and foreign problems, and Truman's popularity continued to grow. He was surprised the pollsters and all the predictions in 1948 when he defeated a popular Thomas Dewey for re-election. He faced Korea, communism, and corruption in government, and refused to run in 1952, but he gave his full support to his party. Truman retired to Independence, Missouri, where he established a Truman Library and completed his memoirs. A high school companion of our 34th president predicted that Ike will wind up as a professor of history. Dwight D. Eisenhower did not teach history, he helped shape it. A West Pointer, he finally became Supreme Commander of Allied forces in Europe. While directing the downfall of Hitler, he gained worldwide respect and prominence as a military leader. Following the war, he was elected president of Columbia University. He also was the first chief of NATO. In 1952, as the Republican nominee for president, he received the largest popular vote ever recorded. He ended the Korean War with a ceasefire agreement and a visit to his troops. Despite a 1955 heart attack, he won re-election the following year and laid the plans to put the United States into the space race. He retired to his farm in Gettysburg in 1961. The first Catholic, first Navy veteran, and youngest man elected to the presidency was John Fitzgerald Kennedy. Born in Brookline, Massachusetts, and graduated from Harvard, his first book, Profiles in Courage, won the 1957 Pulitzer Prize for biography. He's credited with formation of the Peace Corps and the Alliance for Progress. His confrontation with the Soviet Union over missiles in Cuba won him worldwide respect. Upon his assassination in Dallas, Texas, in November of 1963, the bells of Westminster Abbey in London tolled for 1 hour, a tribute always reserved for a member of the royal family. Leaders of 100 nations attended his burial in Arlington National Cemetery, where an eternal light marks his gravesite on a gentle slope before the Lee Mansion. His inaugural address carried his legacy for the American people. Ask not what America can do for you, but what you can do for America, and what together we can all do for the freedom of mankind.
Lyndon Baines Johnson, 6 feet 3 inches tall, was born near Stonewall, Texas in 1908. Graduated from Southwest Texas State Teachers College in 1930. He taught school for 2 years in Houston, Texas. Married Claudia Taylor in 1934 and quickly started up the ladder as congressman, then senator, with 7 months out during the war when he saw action in the South Pacific as a lieutenant commander. A master politician, Johnson became the most powerful and most effective leader in the history of the Senate. He became vice president in 1961 and was sworn in as president on November 22nd, 1963, after the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. He took the oath of office on board the presidential jet at Dallas Airport 1 hour after the president's death. His 30-odd years in government helped him deal with the many problems he had to face as the new chief executive. In filling out the Kennedy term, Johnson worked hard for welfare, civil rights, and anti-poverty legislation. Nominated as the Democratic candidate in 1964, his smashing victory over Barry Goldwater made history. In his first term as president, he declared war on poverty and made every effort to resolve the war in Vietnam. After 5 years in office, Johnson announced that he did not seek a second term as president and would retire to do some lecturing and some writing at the LBJ Ranch near Johnson City, Texas. Richard Milhouse Nixon, born January 9th, 1913, in Yorba Linda, California. He graduated from Whittier College in 1934 and Duke University Law School in 1937. Married to Patricia Ryan on June 21st, 1940, at Riverside, California. They have 2 daughters, Patricia and Julie. The latter married to President Eisenhower's grandson in December of 1968. Richard Nixon served in the United States Navy in World War II. He was elected to Congress in 1946 and to the Senate in 1950. Elected vice president in 1952 and again in 1956, along with President Dwight D. Eisenhower. As a Republican candidate for president in 1968, he defeated the popular incumbent vice president, Hubert H. Humphrey, by a narrow margin of popular votes, but with sufficient electoral votes to become our new President of the United States. Ladies and gentlemen, you have met the 37 Presidents of the United States. Your tour of the Presidential Museum here at Clermont, Florida, has taken 35 minutes. If you have enjoyed your visit, please tell your friends about our museum. We would appreciate your comments in our guest book. We hope you have enjoyed our program and will visit us again soon. And for now, goodbye.